Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied, with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A good tavach, a good week. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer Tanya. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC and is in honor and memory of Rabbi Yosef Halevi Weinberg, Olav Shalom, Rabbi Moshe Pinchas HaKohen Katz, Olav Shalom, Rabbi Yael HaKohen Khan, Olav Shalom. It's also in schus and merit of Rabbi Zev Yecheskel HaKohen and Risha Katz, Le'edich Yom V'Shanim Tevis, for many long, healthy years. It is also in schus of the Tzva Haganah L'Yisrael, holy soldiers who stand on the front lines to protect the men, women, and children of Eretz Yisrael and Eretz HaKodesh. May God protect them all in every possible way. So, we concluded chapter 16, Tazayin and Tanya. Before we go into chapter 17, I would like to respond to a question that was posed. As I point out every week's class, you can go to TanyaApplied.com, where you find this and all previous programs, as well as many other Hasidic resources, TanyaApplied.com. So a question was asked in the context of what we discussed at the end of chapter 16, which also can help segue into the chapter 17 that we're going to enter now. And the question was, so summing up what we learned, in chapter 16, the Alter Rebbe established two key principles. He called it a klal gadol, and then a second klal gadol. That was the beginning of chapter 16. The first klal gadol was what? The fundamental principle that the main thing with a Beinoni is not just behavioral mastery, control over his thought, speech, and action, but also personality change, meaning to control his heart, the very impulses. So in other words, it's not just, okay, you have impulses and you just have a strong discipline. That's also powerful. But ultimately, it's avei evidelikim, not just lei avodai, which can be due to a person's nature or second nature, but there needs to be the work. And the work is to transform yourself as much as possible. The second klal is that when you contemplate, which brings to emotions, and that's the manner of achieving that type of effect. In other words, it's not just your natural discipline or not even natural, but you have superimposed a second nature discipline, but you contemplate and you awaken your emotions, and even when you do that and you don't reach a level of palpable, fiery, passionate love, but it's only remains what he called Ava Mesuteres B'meiche, hidden in his mind, B'talumis Libe, in the hidden parts of your heart, meaning it's not a palpable, fiery passion, but it is an effect on you enough to impact your thought, speech, and action. And that is going to be considered as if you're actually infusing your thought, speech, and action with that personality aspect of yourself that has been transformed. And that's machshava teva, Kodesh Baruch Hu mitzar for l'maisa, that the Eibishter helps to achieve that, even if you can't achieve it completely yourself. That it should be like wings that actually carry, and with a passion, with a soul, your very thought, speech, and action. As we learned at length. So as we came to the end of the chapter, Alter Rebbe was going back and forth and discussing. He called that the level of tfuna. So it's a contemplation, bina, but it's a bina shaykh to midas, which means it's not full-blown emotions, but it's a bina that teaches you that it's appropriate, it's fitting, ye'osa, as he put it. It's fitting and appropriate for your love. That's in your control, that you can contemplate. So even if you can't control that, you should have that fiery passion, as he explained, but you can control what you should contemplate on, and it should have some emotional connection to it. The emotion is that you feel that this is something appropriate. You just cannot bring yourself to love it as much as you love l'havdil elam haza, physical things. So tfuna zu mislabeshes Then, but ma'aseh dibur machshava Torah mitzvah lislam b'chinas meichen v'chayis. So it's not just you're just doing thought, speech, and action behaviorally, controlling that. There are wings here. Ki ilu osuk b'hem b'tchilu rechima mamish. As if you're involved in them and immersed in them with mamish love and reverence in a passionate way. Because this tfuna is what brought you to that place. Lasik behem. And if you didn't have this tfuna, you wouldn't have been busy with it. In other words, we're not talking about someone that's doing it behaviorally, as in Lo Yavodai in chapter 15, where you're doing it only simply because it's either your nature or second nature. But there is work here. And you've done your part. And the Eibush is mitzarfa l'maisa. He takes this machshava teva of yours, and he's mitzarfa l'maisa. Even if that emotion is not there, he fills in that gap. So Bria would be the level of machshava teva, meich, that you're contemplating. La seisei, or the maisa, would be the mitzarefes l'maisa, and the Eibush makes that tziruf. So even if you don't have the full-blown emotions of Yitzira, the world of Tchilu Rechimo, Bizgalas Libe, it's only Betalumis Libe, the Eibush fills in that. Okay. So when a person has those full-blown emotions, and obviously that becomes the wings. He doesn't need the Eibush Siruf. He himself achieves it. But a person who doesn't, God makes that connection. Mitzar for Lamaisa. Because it's only in your mind and even in your heart. It's only affecting you peripherally. You can say, not complete passionate. And to be meichen, and that's why imlei shakadosh baruch hu mitzar for the mechaber. Okay, good. Then, and this is summing up, as I said, it's helpful also to segue to the next chapter. And then he says, so what does the Siruf do? The Eibishter makes that the Maisa Mitzvahs Esek, which a person would do, on your own, it wouldn't reach Elam HaBriya. It would only reach Elam HaYetzirah. Mokam Aliyas HaTeirah Mitzvah Nasmai Deitchiruchim Sichlim. That's his Galus Libe Mamish, as he explains later in the chapter 39 and on. That doesn't need the tziruf of the Eibishter. Because if a person has Tchilu Rechim Sichlim, that's like Bizgalus Libe, or even higher, as the Rebbe Rashab explains. The person who does not have the Tchilu Rechim Sichlim, he has, what does he have? His Talumis Libe. So I explained that he said, even if you don't have the Eibishter Siruf to elevate it to Elam Abriya, which means since you don't have the Tchilu V'Rechim U'Sichri passionate in your heart, you need the Eibishter's support, help. Without that, however, it also goes up to Elam HaYetzirah through the Tchilu V'Rechimu. How? Because two things are happening. And here the Alter Rebbe introduces Tchilu V'Rechimu Tivim, which he also mentioned in chapter 15. Because number one is that you're putting the work in, that Talumis Libe, you are focusing your mind and your emotions. And in turn, you also have the natural love that you have. That's not birthed through Tchilu V'Rechimu Sichlim. It's not birthed through your contemplation. But you have the contemplation. It's just not creating a total emotional passion. It's only Talumis Libe. But you also have the natural. And you've done some Aveda, like he said in the end of chapter 15, when you do that Aveda, so it's not Lo Yavadeh. So that, even Belavach, even without the Tziruf, will bring you to Elam HaYetzirah. But not to Elam HaBriya. That you need the Tziruf. So I explained, and I combined both these elements together, that Tchilu V'Rechim U'Tivim, plus the Machshava Teva, which is the Aveda that you're doing, that as much as you're able to, Yodei Maseges, as much as you can contemplate and affect your emotions, at least that it's worthy and appropriate to love God, which is in your control. So even without the Eibishter's support, that also goes to Olam HaYetzirah. So the question that was asked is, B'lav Hachi, we know that there's some explain it differently. That Balavochi is not referring to your effort. Balavochi is referring to the Ava V'yira Tivim. Meaning, since a person puts his effort to awaken or to stimulate the natural love that is inherent within him, so that's already an Avodah. He also then doesn't need the tziruf. So why did I say that it's connected to the Ava Misoteres and the Talumis Libe? It's connected to the work that you're doing to awaken the natural. So in truth is there are those two interpretations, but when you read it closely, it seems to me at least, that they are a combination, because the Alter Rebbe is bringing them together. So Balav Hochi means both things. In other words, you can interpret in three ways. Balav Hochi can mean that even if you only have the Talumis Libe, you also reach the Yetzirah. Two, it can mean, second interpretation, is talking Balav Hochi, when you put work on awakening your natural love. Not the love that you are generating through mind, but not causing passionate love. And three, the combination of both of them. Because the fact of the matter is, it's not two people here. When you're contemplating with your effort, and it's arousing at least a passion that you feel it's appropriate. It's not the fiery passion of his galus libe. So you can say what you have done is really two things at once. That contemplation has also stimulated the dormant natural love that he spoke about in chapter 15. And that's why I combined them together, which seems to me more fitting when you explain it in context of chapter 15, where he says that avodah can be two things. Either it's completely generated by you contemplate, and you're not relying on your natural love, or he said that you contemplate and you awaken and stimulate the dormant love, as he said at the end of chapter 15. So by combining these two, it makes it easier to understand what you can achieve through your effort. And then there's the mitzarfa, that since you haven't achieved chile v'rechimu sichlim, in other words, you haven't been able to fully experience the passionate love, the Eibishter fills in that part. Yeah. He says clearly, he's ma'ered it, or Taveda Tama, that he says that a person simply contemplates. So keep in mind the main few things that we have to keep in mind is like this now. The resources a person has is not in any particular order, but let's begin in the order. You're born naturally with a natural love for God. But that's not an Aveda. That's something, Yerusham Avesenu, as he explained in chapter 15. The work is to stimulate that. But it's more than that. As much as you stimulate the natural, it's still natural. The real Aveda is that you work on your own, you work hard on appreciating God, not because you inherited this. It's not genetic, but through your work. And that achieves something much greater, as he explains later in chapter 39 and on. Because your mind, your effort, your koiches have generated, like he explains in chapter 3, you've contemplated on God. I'm a malak kalam, seviv kalam, kula kamei kala chashiv. And that in turn has born midas, chachma, bina, with das, with the iskashus, gives birth to midas, Ava V'yira, and they're and like he says, they're true Ava V'yira, sustainable love and reverence that comes dafke through Chachma Bina Das, much higher than Tchila Rechimotivim. That came naturally. However, that doesn't mean that the natural love should be ignored. It's also a resource to access. So we have here three things. We have here pure Tchila Rechimosichlim. In the highest level, that creates actually bizgalus libe, a passionate love. You have the chilur rechimotivim, that's the natural dormant love that everybody has. And then you have the aveda betalumis libe, which you do as much effort as you can. And that in turn also awakens the natural love, and that invokes the machshava teva kodesh baruch mitzar l'maisa, that he fills in that which chilur rechimosichlim has on its own. He fills that in, that we should have that connection as well, that should serve as the wings that elevate us. So you have covered all scenarios here. The highest level of Abeinani, Tchila v'rechim esichlim. You have the lowest level of Abeini is Lo Yavodai, and then you have in between, there's Avodai, as much as you're capable of doing. So that's an explanation of that conclusion. Now, based on all this comes chapter 17. And chapter 17 goes back, I should say, to the central theme of Tanya. And here you see the brilliance of how the Alter Rebbe has built up a case in the last 16 chapters that now come back to what he wrote on the Sharblat. Remember, the Sharblat of Tanya, the cover page, told us the theme of Tanya. What was the theme? That this Sefer is miyusad al posuk ki korev elecha adover me'oid. That this dover, Torah mitzvahs, is the simple interpretation, is korev elecha adover me'oid, is very relevant to you. Beficha, belvavcha, ubelvavcha la'asese. Levayet hetev, eichu korev me'oid. It's not just korev elecha, but it's korev me'oid, adover me'oid. So now, the obvious question is how? We're not talking about tzaddikim now. We're talking about a person who's born with a nefesh elikis and nefesh abamis, has a battle, has not won the battle. A person, midas kol adam v'arechar kol adam yimshach, like he explained the Beinani. The tzaddik is a particular category which we'll talk because by him you could say, because like he'll say, soon we'll learn, he controls his heart. He's reached a place where he's controlled the heart, including the left side of the heart where the animal soul resides, and he's transformed it. Tzaddik Gomer, Tzaddik Sheina Gomer, chapter 10. But we say, to every person. And that was the whole operative question. How can you say that? So la say you could say. Because every person, even if you're not in the mood or you don't feel it, you can be expected to act a certain way. Beficha also, your speech, what you speak about. Learn Torah, beficha, which we'll soon discuss as well. But levavcha is the big question. Can you control your heart, your emotions? And that's what the Alter Rebbe is going to address. So really what's coming now around is coming back to the very central theme of Tanya. What are you capable of? And the pasuk says, "Korev elecha davar beficha b'lvavcha la'aseh," including b'lvavcha. Now that we've learned that even a Beinani, who has a Yitzhak Teva and a Yetzer Hara, a Nefesh Elikis, Nefesh Abamis, has the power of Moich Shal Talev, and with all the aspects of it, the different support and the different ways we reach there, and the different levels that we talked about, Avodai, Lo Yavodai. And now, especially in chapter 16, that he explained that even if you don't reach that passionate love, you still reach a level where you appreciate and you have the power to feel and appreciate that it's worthy of loving. And that is considered like passionate love, because the Eibush says mitzarfel l'maisa, like we discussed. That will now explain ki korev elecha davar me'oid for each one of us. And that's what the theme of this chapter is about. So really he's bringing everything together. This is going to be a continuing theme, the next chapters all the way through chapter 25. But you see now how it's going to come together in that key point that he made in the introduction to Tanya, which is giving us a guidebook of how a person can connect to God, whoever you are. And you don't need to be someone unique. Every person has this capacity. So let's learn now inside. Ubezeh yuvan, says the Alter Rebbe. And with this, really everything we've learned till here, but specifically in the last chapter, he's built up the case. We can explain the verse which was brought on the title page, the Sharblat of Tanya, Masha Kosuv, Ki korev elecha davar me'oid beficha b'lvavcha la'aseh. For this, what's his wish? There's the body of all the commandments. A mitzvah hazes, as he says in the pasuk in his Sovim, Lamed Yural 30:11. It's talking about kol ha'teira kula. Moshe Rabbeinu is telling the Eden, you should know it's not lechekahi, it's not distant, it's not me'ever layam, across the wide sea, it's not in Shemayim in heaven. It's korev elecha, relevant, accessible to you. You're able to be there. The big question, can we reach divine experience when we live in a material world? Or is there an invisible glass ceiling that doesn't allow us to get to that level? That's a fundamental question of what a person is capable of becoming. And the whole point of Chassidus Chabad, the Alter Rebbe, is to tell us you can reach the highest levels. So now we'll understand how. That this thing is very much within reach for you in your mouth, in your heart, so that you can do it. The Lechera, because apparently, seemingly, the obvious question, at first glance, B'levovcha. The pasuk says B'levovcha, in your heart. Neged achushalanu. It goes contrary to the experience of our very sense. Why? Because a person's heart, we're talking about every human being, is drawn to survival. It doesn't mean we don't have at times a transcendent longings, but we also have we have an animal soul that is driven by the left side of the heart toward its own needs, its own passions, its own pleasures and desires, as we learned. So it's neged achushalan. So how could the pasuk tell us b'levavcha? You can get korav elecha b'ficho lasese. But what about levavcha? So you can think, the answer would be that maybe Moshe is not talking to all of us. Maybe Taka Levavcha is not for us. Levavcha is referring to his generation. That can be a consideration. So the Alter Rebbe preempts that in the brackets. He says, V'ateirehi nitzchis. What is he coming to add here? He's coming to preempt and say, and dismiss the possibility that a person can say, you know what, the Deya, the elevated generation of Moshe, there was Korav Elecha B'ficha B'levavcha also. Because they were on a higher level. But not everyone. So he says, no, Teda is Nitzchis. So it has to be applicable today as well. So now we have the question. It's Neged Achushalanu. It's a very interesting expression. Neged Achushalanu means, literally it defies our senses. But it really means it's seemingly not something that all of us can access. It's not the experience, our natural experience. Ask yourself, Yod Inish Benafshe. Does your heart naturally gravitate to Hadovar Hazeh, to mitzvahs, to Torah mitzvahs? As I said, there are times it could be. But we have a lev that is focused on and very much driven by other forces as well. But after everything we've learned about what a Beinoni is, all the way till the end of chapter 16, this will be answered. But before we get to the answer, the Alter Rebbe continues to build up this question. She'ein korav me'ed adover lahapech libe metayves elam hazel la'avas Hashem b'emes. It would seem that it's not within our access, not relevant or within reach of each one of us, because it means you would have to turn your heart away from the desires of this world to genuine love of God. She'en korav me'ed adover. Our chush, you ask a regular person, if someone says to you, is it something that you find natural, korav me'ed, natural or accessible or reachable or relevant or practical, to transform your heart from the desires of this world to love God with the emes, with a genuine, sincere love? The answer is no. It's not something that comes simple or easy or accessible. It's not korav me'ed. If you said something that we have to try, but you're saying korav me'ed, korav elecha dover me'ed b'levavcha. So how do you explain that? There's an expression that's brought from the Chevis Halavavis that says you cannot love the world and love God at the same time, because they're antithetical. The Sefer HaChinuch says similarly in Mitzvah Tov Yud Ches 4:18. Because they're not compatible. And we see the fact is that we do have this compartmentalization. We have both drives, we have both voices. So that just comes to emphasize even more that mainly you talk about dibura maisa, beficha laseh, fine, you have control over that. But to control your emotions doesn't seem karev elecha me'ed, adover me'ed. And as we said, we have to say it applies to everyone, not just to Moshe's generation. And then the Alter Rebbe continues to drive that point home. That besides it's not chush salonu, the Alter Rebbe then continues and says, even the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, like the Gemara says, Otu yira milsa zutrasehi. So the Gemara tells us in Brachos Lamed Gimel Beis 33b, is reverence yira, reverence of what? Reverence of Hashem, of God, is such a small thing. There it's referring to when my Moshe says, V'ati Yisrael ma Hashem elekecha shel mi'imach. Kim liyiras Hashem. What already is God asking of you, Moshe says. He's like, what is he really asking? He's only asking you to revere him. So the Gemara says, Moshe makes it so simple. As if Yira is easy. Is it a small thing to revere God? So you see from that the Gemara itself is acknowledging that it's not a simple matter. And that's Yira. The Alter Rebbe says, if Yira is that difficult, how much more so Ava? Because loving is even more difficult than Yira. You can explain a person, it's easier for him to revere something, to avoid it, to refrain. But Ava requires an active arousal, an active feeling of drawing to longing to something. So what do you see from that? That Levavcha is not just neged achushalon, that even in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, even the Deir HaMidbar, the Deir of Moshe Rabbeinu, the Gemara already says, Milsa is Otu Yirim Milsa Zutrasi. So it's not an easy thing. And here we say, Korav Elecha Adover Me'ed. Bilvavcha. And Levavcha, of course, includes Yira and Ava. So it's just making the case even more. How can we say Korav Elecha on Levavcha, on an emotional reaction? You can control action, you can control words, but an emotion is, you can't regulate. Either you feel it or you don't feel it. So that just emphasizes and the question even more. Mukolshke and Ava, because Ava is even more difficult. They should desire it. And then finally, the Alter Rebbe says one more thing. V'gam omru Rabbeinu Zal, the tzaddikim dafka libo b'rishusam. It's dafka tzaddikim whose heart is in their control. So it's only tzaddikim, and here say kol v'lecha, everybody. So there's another reason that levavcha is not kol v'lecha. It's only by tzaddikim. And then the Alter Rebbe is going to come and answer all of this based on what we learned earlier about the Beinani, and especially about talumas libe that brings l'maisa. But for that, we'll continue in the next shir, in the next class. So we'll stop here. No, I don't like to end by a question. So you can always look in Tanya, but he's building up the case to explain how takitz korev elecha also b'levavcha. That's the conclusion. So that's not, the question is clear, but now we're going to come to the answer. We'll do that next week. So everyone have a very good week. TanyaApplied.com. Be well, and only brachas, and only shalom leis.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit ChasidusApplied.com for archived classes and more resources.